Maverick fam, welcome to the Truth Project, man. Oh, so grateful to have you guys. If you are brand new here, this is our weekly Bible study. I feel like it's the cool kids Bible study. Let me explain, okay? I have had some frustrating experiences going to different church Bible studies, all right? All types of churches. We're not picking on anyone specifically, but I struggled because there was a lot of Christianese, a lot of vagueness, a lot of just all over the place, and I would get a lot of feel-good message, but didn't really leave with much practical. And so our attempt here is to try to make our faith as practical as possible, because often we want to get closer to God, we want to do the right things, but don't know how. And we're all on the same quest, and that is a search for truth. We don't claim to have it or to be the authors of it. We're just facilitating the conversation around it. So we appreciate you joining us, whether you're on Twitch, YouTube, or Maverick.tv. I must remind you, if you are watching over on Twitch or YouTube, now is a good time to use the sneaky link, !Ninja. That's going to give you a link where you can head on over to Maverick.tv, create a free account. It's typically $10 a month to hang out over here. And you can hang out for free, potentially even get gifted a Ninja membership. And then you get to participate in all the cool festivities around here. All right. My favorite of which is that new Wukong. Okay, I just dropped a series over on Maverick.tv. Good stuff going on there. But check us out, man. Link in the description, or if you want that sneaky link, it's not the normal link. Okay, it's !Ninja. But our process here is pretty simple. I'm gonna open up with some prayer, and then Luke's gonna throw it to a video. After that video ends, we'll come back, have a little conversation. Our goal is to be here about an hour to 90 minutes, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes we go a little bit later. I know the college football season is starting today, so some of y'all in a hurry, but hang out, man. We're gonna have some good conversation. So with that, let me jump into prayer, and then we'll throw into that video. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to invite you into this space. Please do all the things that you do. Open our hearts, open our minds, help us receive this message, be humble in the communication and the conversation afterwards. And hopefully we leave a little bit better than we came. And with that, we love you, thank you, and praise you for all that you are and all that you're doing in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Maverick fam, how's it going? How is your mama? Hope all is well with you guys. Welcome back to the Truth Project. Now we are in week 3 of a series that we are calling the Lost Art of Love. Now we've been going through the 4 dimensions in life. And we've been going in reverse. So we started with economics. Last week we talked about love as it comes to the dimension of our mental and physical health. And now we're talking about relationships. Now, this one's kind of like the obvious one, right? Like, you get it. Love belongs in relationships. So it's been fun to tackle the other conversations. But just because it's obvious that love should be in relationships, it can often be the hardest, man, because the people around us, the people we love the most, will challenge us which they'll put us in the toughest positions. Sometimes they can bring the worst out of us. And so that's something we're going to talk about today. But also keep in mind, when we're talking about the relationship dimension, of course, it means our relationship with others, but also it's our relationship with ourselves. Sometimes we don't think about that, but you have a relationship with yourself. And so I'm going to go over 4 F's that'll be our framework for this conversation. Just know that those don't just apply to the outside world. It's also with yourself as well. All right. So let's dive right into it. This is a good time for me to plug the notes. You can use exclamation notes in the chat and you'll get a Google Doc that has everything I'm talking about here and some. All right. I include relevant scripture that I don't get the time to go over here. And I also include usually like 5 to 10 study questions that are things you can meditate on throughout the week, just to help really drive the points that we discuss here home. All right. And try to make them, as practical as possible to your life. Now, again, exclamation notes in the chat, and we'll drop that link for you so you can follow along with me. But the first F for our conversations when we're talking about love inside of relationships is going to be fullness. Now, this on its own, I think, redefines how you approach relationships completely. And I believe this is also more of a biblical approach where we aren't getting into relationships, whether that's romantically, that could be your friends, even, people you may work with or associate with. The point of them isn't for them to fill us up or make us okay, or for us to get something out of that person. And for a lot of people, that can be a complete culture shock in terms of how you approach dealing with people. Because usually we think, hey, I'm partnering with you in something because you're going to make me better. And I'm not just saying like you make the project better, but like, hey, we're friends because you make me happy, or we're going to marry someone or, date someone because of how we think they make us feel. And so there's this fullness, there's this peace, there's something that we feel like we can't achieve without them. And sometimes we're blatant and it's obvious that we know we're doing it. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle, and we don't realize that we're using people until they aren't acting the way that we want them to act, right? Maybe you had a friend and you guys became friends because they acted a certain way and you were okay with that and you loved it. And then they stopped doing the things that you liked, and you realize, hey, I'm not as okay when you're not doing these things. I'm not as full. And those are warning signs, and that's good feedback for us to have, because we don't want to show up that way in our relationships. And although it can be foreign for us at first, once you really adopt this approach, every relationship gets better. You would think that, I just don't need anyone at this point. If I'm full, right? What's the point of having relationships? When in actuality, all the relationships get better and have more meaning because they're not filtered through your selfishness. You can actually see them for who they are, what they're going for, or what they have going on in their life, and just truly who they are without you looking through your selfish goggles of who they are through how they impact you. And like I said, once you get this, it completely shifts how you go about all of your relationships. Y'all know I'm full of food analogies, but how I like to think of it is maybe, if you guys ever been to like maybe Costco, there's this place called like a sawmill market out here where they have a bunch of different restaurants, and you can kind of, grab different things from different places. But they'll also be out there with samples, right? Promoting their restaurant. So my wife and I will go there and eat. We'll usually get places from, food from different places, and then we're full. But sometimes on the way out, you got people trying to serve you different desserts, different, pieces from their entrees. And although I would be fine whether I had the sample or not, because I'm full, there's nothing I need. I'm satisfied off of the food I ate. That doesn't stop some of that food from tasting good. The last time we went, they had like this little walnut little pastry, I think from it was like a Persian snack or something. Again, I was full. I wasn't hungry. I didn't even ask for it. It was a free gift. And not only was the pastry unnecessary, I also didn't even need the conversation, but I enjoyed the conversation talking to the guy. He was super excited to my reaction over the snack, because it was really good. And it was an experience that I enjoyed 100%. It doesn't mean that it wasn't good and that it wasn't even meaningful to my life. it just didn't affect my fullness, my happiness, my satisfaction one bit. It's not like I ate that and was like, woo, I was hungry, that filled me up. Or, I was dissatisfied with my food. It was 100% unneeded, but still 100% appreciated. And that's the approach we can have. We can have companionship. We can have partners. And there are situations where two can come together and there's a synergistic effect. So it's not 1 + 1 = 2, but it'd be 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, just because you guys are great business partners or romantic partners, whatever it may be. And you can still have that effect, right? We need a team to accomplish things, but it's saying, hey, I don't need you in my life so that I'm okay. But of course, we'll partner and we'll achieve different things, and we can have friendship. It's just from fullness, not trying to get fullness. Okay, moving on to forgiveness. And I'm going to pick up the pace here, especially moving on this point, because we recently did a Truth Project episode on forgiveness. So I'll make sure I link to some of those notes in the actual notes for this section. But I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. And it gets even easier once you have the fullness from the first point. But it's this idea that you won't be perfect, and neither will the people around you be perfect. And so you have to have a constant practice of forgiveness, or you won't have anyone in your life, okay? And you also have to work on forgiving yourself as well. And it's this understanding that you won't always make the right decision, neither will the other people around you. And you're not allowing the mistakes from yourself or others, even that kind of stuff, to take away from your fullness. And it's important to take note that when we say forgiveness, it doesn't mean that, there won't be people that you remove from your life or that you won't have boundaries. All right. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean restoration. Someone may do some horrible things to you, and they don't need to be in your life anymore, but you don't hold that grudge against them. All right. And you don't hold anything in your heart against them. That is what forgiveness is. Number 3 is fruitfulness. And this is just all about being mindful of what's coming from the relationship, because it's bearing some sort of fruit. It may not be positive. It could be negative. Okay. And maybe you're like, nah, trust me, Dion, this relationship isn't bearing anything. And I think that's even worth noting, that maybe some of our relationships have been so neglected that they could be dying. And that's not the point. We shouldn't have those type of relationships. We should be mindful of all of them and the state of all of them. I think it's very healthy to look at them as like a bank account. How much have I deposited into the relationship, and how much am I withdrawing? Am I always asking? Am I leeching? Am I using this person? Or am I using my fullness, right, and not demanding anything from them, but depositing and being a good friend and bearing good fruit in that relationship? So much we could say on that one, and all of these. I think almost all of these points could have their own series. And I think it's important to note that none of these are a comprehensive view. Or we're not trying to get a full view on relationships where there's nothing to be added, just to have 4 key points to really have some good conversation for today. And then lastly, as we move into the last F, we have freedom. Okay, so we have fullness, forgiveness, fruitfulness, and then freedom. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, understanding that we can't control people. And sometimes that's why we get in relationships, all right, is to try to manipulate and control people and to get them to act the way that we want them to act so that we can be okay. But again, if you're working on all these previous ones, hopefully you can move with a level of freedom and allow people to be themselves. But this is also for you as well. Are you showing up in your relationships authentic and honest to who you are? Or are you kind of manipulating who you are and sugarcoating things or pretending to be a little bit of what you're not so that you can fit in or so that you can appease other people? In summary, we are working to be full of the Spirit of God, and so that we're not needing to get anything from any of our relationships. Doesn't mean we can't have amazing experiences and really appreciate people and do amazing things. We're just doing it from fullness, not for fullness. We are making sure to constantly forgive others and ourselves, because we know no one is perfect. We are mindful of what fruit is coming from our relationships. Okay, is it positive? Is it negative? Are we letting things die? And lastly, we are giving people to be or giving people the freedom to be themselves, whether we're in some sort of relationship with them or not. Because how many people are we trying to control or on the other side of the world we don't even know nothing about, we don't even understand? And I actually think we stress ourselves out a lot less and have a much better experience when we are giving people the freedom to just be who they're going to be anyway. And I love what we did last week, so I would love you to give me a grade, all right? 1 to 5 in each of those areas. So 1 to 5 for fullness in your relationships. And this is a comprehensive question. You got to give me like an average, because you got so many different relationships, right? Like I said, yourself, co-workers, could have romantic, could have kids. There's so many, okay? But, you know, we're going to average it together here. So give yourself a grade 1 to 5 for fullness, forgiveness. These are all separate scores. Fruitfulness and freedom. All right. 1 to 5. Maybe I'll come back and answer mine and as an early discussion instead of making this video any longer. All right. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Please answer that and let's get the conversation going.
Party people, it's good to see you. I know your boy was running a little late, but we're here and I'm excited because I love these kinds of conversations. I actually was just listening to a podcast on how to navigate friendships. I was literally just listening to that by Megan Ashley, if you guys are familiar with her. And, you know, she's definitely been doing a lot of dope stuff with Jackie Hill Perry over the year, and just introduced to her content. Beautiful stuff, beautiful conversation. I think some of that might play a part in this conversation. But man, Bishop, what's your beginning thoughts, man?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And maybe at some point you share some of those thoughts from the podcast and we could maybe unpack some of that, because I would imagine is relevant as we are talking about the lost art of love and relationships. I want you guys, I loved the answers we got last week in the comments where you guys gave your score from 1 to 5 on the ratings. And so let's do that again. Y'all remember, let me make sure I got my notes up so I remember my own stuff. But we had 4 Fs where we're talking for the art of love inside of relationships. So we have the first F for fullness, the second is forgiveness, the third is fruitfulness, and the fourth is freedom. Quick summary, I'll give my score as I give a quick summary of any of those, if maybe you jumped in late to the video. So fullness is this idea that we are full off the Spirit of God and we aren't trying to necessarily get anything from these relationships. Doesn't mean we can't enjoy them, doesn't mean that there's not awesome parts that we appreciate, but it's not like, hey, I need you to act a certain way for me to be okay. Examples from my life might be as a husband, needing my wife to not have an attitude. I tell myself a lot. That's just a big one for me. I would almost wait for my wife to set the tone for how my day was going to go. I wake up, they say a happy wife, happy life. And I was one of them ninjas. I wake up and be like, watching her close, like, okay, you're in a good mood. Yeah, it's a good day. And then I could tell if she had an attitude, I'd be like, here she go again. And that's, again, it's, you don't even necessarily get it in the moment, but you are needing other people to be a certain way for you to be okay. And obviously we can see the problems with that. So I'm gonna give myself a fullness rating of 4. I'm gonna do 4. Can we do point? I'm gonna do 3.8. I'm gonna go 3.8. All right.
That's cheating.
Okay, I'm gonna go 4. Okay. I was trying to be humble. I was trying to take a couple points off, but great want me to be full of myself.
I need whole numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to go 4. I had to do a lot of work from that. And, you guys have seen me bring that analogy to the table a lot. It's something that is comprehensive. Don't worry, I don't got ghosts. That's my son in the back. Moving the chair. But, and so, yeah, it's something I've been so intentional about. And even whether I wanted to or not, God has been giving me so many situations where it's like, Ninja, you aren't going to get what you want from that person or this situation. And I've had to learn how to, let God be that for me. So I'm gonna give myself a 4 there out of 5. For forgiveness, I'm gonna give myself a 5. It's, again, something I've learned I'm really proud of myself where I'm at with that. I used to be the exact opposite of that. I don't really recap forgiveness. I think we all know what that is. It's pretty simple. Your ability to forgive people doesn't mean they have to be restored to the certain position they might have been in your life, right? Someone can cheat on you, you cut them off, but still don't hold that anger or resentment in your heart. As I've grown as a parent too, man, I realized that's a big part of parenting. Like, I didn't think I would be so frustrated sometimes and have these little things man, sometimes your kids just piss you off. You be looking at them like, I can't believe you said that, or you feel this way, or whatever you're going through. And as a parent, you just got to let a lot of things go. And so I've had a lot of practice with that. Fruitfulness. Now, this is just the mindful. Imagine you had a garden, right? You every plant in there should exist for a reason, right? You ain't just randomly have tomatoes pop up. You're like, yo, I planted these tomatoes. I want them here. And so you should be mindful of how that fruit is producing, right? And you doing the things necessary to have the fruit that you desire. And I think sometimes we can get in relationships and just lose that mindfulness, and life can happen. Priorities, get a little bit blurry. You just start reacting to life. And I think we can be a little bit less mindful. And as of that, I think you're unlike your garden, there's always fruit being produced in a relationship. It's just like, is it good or is it bad? Is there more neglect and that may be leading towards one direction, or is it thriving? And so for myself, I'm gonna give myself a 3 in that. I feel like I get all my points. I'm pretty mindful of it, but I'm not as good at hitting people up. Someone will be on my mind, and I don't like is how little I might hit people up and remind them of how special and important they are to me. But yeah, outside that, I think I'm solid. Freedom, allowing people to be who they are. I'm gonna give myself a 4 there, only because Great won't let me do a 4.5. That's where I was more so landing. I definitely can think of moments where I'm not perfect because I might be judging people in my head a little bit. I have a lot of that real quick, like, should you have done that? Why you do that? What you doing over there? I don't agree. I don't understand that. But I've had a lot of work, and I've just had a lot of experience with what I do for a living. Is I get so many opinions from so many different perspectives and angles, and I've had the chance to really wrestle with that and realize, man, some of the people I understand the least is just because they had a different upbringing, and had I had a lot of their same experiences, I would be very similar. And that's the beauty. It's like the gift and the curse of our experiences, because they're so real for us and they help us inform us and give us so much intel. But sometimes our experiences can kind of box us in, and we think the world is only limited to how we've seen it before and how we've seen it interact, or how we've interacted with it. And some people on the other side of the world, or just the other side of the block, man, you don't know what people are dealing with in their home day to day. It's just, especially when we're all on this path of truth and God, it just, everyone's doesn't look the same. Okay. And a lot of us, myself included, we take detours and setbacks and all types of shenanigans. And I think I've just realized that enough in my life that has humbled me to really be at a place where I'm not out here trying to change people and bring them onto my timing or my understanding or my race at my pace. So, fullness. I forgot what I said. I think I said a 4 there.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like a 3, because you wouldn't let me do like a whatever the 3.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness, I'm gonna go 5. Fruitfulness, I'm gonna bring that to stay at a 3 there, and then freedom, I'm gonna go 5. What would you say? Great.
That's really good. I think I'm gonna be really humble in a lot of these, man. I think just because I see where I am and I know how much information. I was just thinking about this morning in my gratitude that I recorded on my walk, how sometimes I feel, or I can notice myself trying to live at a spiritual maturity that I'm not at yet. And I think it's because of the comprehension, man, of a lot of the stuff that I've learned, like teaching, listening to so many people come with so many unique perspectives that I really enjoy, that are challenging, and that I can understand not only how they arrived there, but how it'll benefit me. And so because I hear it, I'm like, oh man, that makes so much sense. And yet there hasn't been, maybe in some cases, an experience where that can be tested in me to see if I really get it, Case in point, this political season, I was just over this week, I've noticed that there has been a tension in me, even just in the home, seeing how much effort um, individuals in my home are seemingly putting outwardly to a lot of the stuff happening with politics and all that kind of stuff, and encouraging to vote and all that. And I kind of was able to diagnose it a little bit this morning, because it wasn't necessarily coming from a place of such strong disagreement that like I can't stand it. It's actually more of like a sadness and a fear behind some of the tension that's coming up. Sadness in the sense of it sucks to see that and yet feel as if that there hasn't been a similar effort to pursue after Christ in a lot of ways. And I do understand that with me saying that, there's great leaps of assumptions I'm making that I don't have information for to actually say that that's a truthful statement. But that's just what I was feeling. And then there's a fear of, man, if time comes where that conversation circles back around to where they're asking me, am I voting for who they're just assuming everybody should be voting for in the House? And I'm like, y'all, I don't really think y'all want to have that conversation with me, because I'm going to probably say things that are going to trigger you. But if I'm really honest, I don't think it should, because of the values you claim to stand for. And I think that's that. And so there's a fear of maybe how that conversation would go. And so I've just tried to really make peace with a lot of just the adjustments, the approaching, and keeping the main thing. 8 things that I'm reminded of. Jesus King, the kingdom agenda is the greatest thing, right? Loving others as myself, knowing that no matter who takes the seat, God's in authority, all those kinds of things, and keeping the main thing. But I say all that to say that this kind of falls into that category for me, because I want to give the rating not from a place of where I feel I could be, but from a place I'm actually at. So fullness, I would probably say a 3. Forgiveness, I would probably say, I actually might give myself, I'll give myself a 4. Give myself a 4 for forgiveness. Fruitfulness, I will give myself a 5. The reason I give myself a 5 at that category is I've learned one really interesting character trait I've learned about myself over time is it's really hard for me to look at situations and circumstances I'm experiencing and not ponder what benefit can I get from this? What lesson can I get from this? What is available here? Or even if I don't see it, even if I can't see it, really leaning on the hope that there's something here that can come out of this that will benefit me for who I'm becoming. And so I really choose to hold on to that, especially in relationships, maybe relationships that are no longer, relationships that have transitioned, or even just in the midst of it, I think. And sometimes it can be a fault of mine too, and I can get caught up in not being present, and more so caught up in, okay, I'm trying to establish the purpose here. Because to me, sometimes it's like, well, if there is no movement or purpose behind this relationship in terms of a finish line, if there's no finish line here, then sometimes I can navigate it and say, well, there's no need for me to be here, and there's no need for me to have this connection. And I think that's, I think what I'm learning is that it can definitely come off self-righteous. It can definitely come off very disingenuous, and it comes off from it can lean closer to a cultural standpoint of, well, if it no longer serves me, then it's no longer something I need in my life. And what I am seeing is that can't be the case for all your relationships. That can't be the case for all my relationships. And instead of looking for how does this relationship serve me, sometimes we're so focused on that we don't even see how we are not being servants to the people that we're connected to. And so that's probably plays a role on why the relationship is so and nonchalant and not where you maybe feel like it can be, because you haven't put in the right amount of effort or a true effort in connecting with this person, because you're still waiting on them to do something for you, to give you permission to do the right thing. And I think that ties into a lot of what you opened up with. So fruitfulness, I would definitely say a 5. And I'll add this too. I think what confirms that for me, and it may be different for you guys, I would love to hear a lot of the whys behind why you guys are rating it too. I'd love to hear that. 1 sentence, 2 sentences, however many. We'll definitely try to get through it. But I think for me, when I've experienced brokenness from relationships that hurt, relationships that severed, and I didn't really want to, but I was still able to protect that individual, love that individual, and still see the good in that individual and the relationship. Like it's interesting how in culture people will have friendship breakups or relationship breakups, and they'll be like, well, that person was never this, that, and the third. I'm like, were they never though? Like, was it always a bad time? Was it always as toxic and unhelpful as you are projecting it to be when you get on TikTok to use as a median to your healing? And you are allowing comment sections to create narratives in your mind about somebody they don't know, but you know. And so you're just going on and on trying to describe the situation, you describe the person, you might even go as far as to give names and locations and what they did to you. And then, all you do is have comment. I've seen it, bro. It's so crazy. Like, especially as of late, I've seen it. People get on there and it goes trending. The story is juicy. Everybody's sipping tea in the comment section, trying to put pieces together on why it happened on somebody they don't know. And then they will go, even social media has a tendency of going the length to go find. I mean, you talk about craziness. Like, people have been very, I would say, maybe not as discreet as they think they are being, but in some ways they are, in terms of maybe this specific person and where they live and all that kind of stuff. And people will literally take the time to go and sift out where this person is and who this person is. And they will find their social media tags. They will follow them. They will tag them. They will do all these other kinds of things. And people are like, bro, I don't even know how y'all found them. I didn't even say anything crazy. And it's wild to me. And again, I see people time and time again in breakups go to social media as a means to like trauma dump, or as a means to just express where they are, and they're not getting healing. They're just getting a lot of people who really don't know you, nor the situation, nor the other person. And they're just giving you fillers. Oh, you're so strong. Oh, you're so strong. You're going to be okay. You're going to make it, this, that, and the third. And it's really maybe a contentious point for me that I have to be mindful of. But I tie that to fruitfulness, because that is the opposite of gaining fruit from connections, even if they're broken. Whereas for me, what I've learned is when I went through it, instead of going to social media, I admitted how I felt. Maybe not exactly to that individual, but to a community. D can testify. I've admitted how I felt. It didn't feel good. It wasn't the greatest thing. And yet still being able to get healing through conversation and admission. And then if I did, which I do in times, take those opportunities and those memories or those things to social media, but it's not from a standpoint of needing consolidation from people, or it's not from needing validation from people. It's not for you to become my comment section therapist. It's not any of that. Actually, I'm actually speaking back to those things with lessons, less about who that person was or who I may have felt they weren't at the time, but more about, okay, this is what I learned from it. This is actually what this conversation and this rejection exposed in me. This is how I learned that codependency fell off of me. This is how I learned that I was no longer moving an anxious attachment, but now growing closer to a secure attachment, because this person in this connection, when they said this, it revealed to me that I wasn't really where I thought I was. Giving all those stories, but speaking more about me and way less about that individual. If anything, what's highlighted is the generalities of the story. And so I think that is a really good way of indication to let me know fruitfulness from relationships, whether they're healthy or broken or fallen, severed, no longer, that's still present. And I think that's a really cool thing to look back on. Then freedom, man, I love it, man. I'd say a 5. Well, no, let me bring that back. I'd probably say a 4. The reason I'd say a 4 is because I think when you reach a full level and brevity of freedom, which I think all of us in some aspect desire to reach, I don't know if you're necessarily going to find yourself offended when you're connected to people who think so differently than you, to the point where you feel I don't think you'll feel any kind of tension in you to desire to correct somebody who may be saying or portraying something that you don't agree with. I've found myself doing that. I've told you guys before. I definitely, growing up in church, I've created a Pharisee perspective in me that I've had to constantly lay down. So in many conversations that I'll have with people, when they mention something about scripture, man, there's something in me that's like, oh, is that really what that says? Like, come on, bruh. Like, let's do some deeper study. And it's taken moments where I've spoken out of turn, or it's taken moments where I misunderstood the main point of that person even mentioning that, and I went ahead and tried to correct them. It took me failing in those moments to see and mature and like, no, that ain't it. Like that's not even, that's not even the whole purpose of it, right? And so I think when you're actually moving in freedom, you won't, I don't know if it's necessary to say you won't experience tension there. I would say that you won't harbor on it. It won't be something that you allow to drive a wedge between you and another individual. They can be completely who they are. You can be completely who you are, and allow it to be an amazing thing. And I'll be honest too. I do think there can be room where I'm underselling myself and in that area specifically. But I just think I know enough of me to know, there's some conversations I've had with people where I'm like, there's a inkling in me to want to correct it, and I don't, but there is that inkling in moments, and I have to look beyond that to still endure the conversation, still see the beauty in it, still get the main things out of what they're sharing, and still carry that conversation, seeing that person and allowing them to be fully seen, fully heard, fully known, and fully loved. And I've grown in it. But I do think that freedom, man, it's when you really tap into it, I don't know if there's any tension that you experience. And that might be where I leave it at. But I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on a lot of that. And I think a scripture, man, I know you tied some scriptures to this. I think a scripture I would land on maybe for this entire conversation. And I'll bring in points from the podcast I listened to earlier because it was really, really good. And I think it'd be helpful for some of us in here trying to learn and navigate relationships and connections in a daily manner. But 1 Corinthians 13, you guys know that's like a scripture I ride for, bro. That's the one. Okay. Like on my tombstone, that's probably what 1 Corinthians 13. Don't forget it. That's it. And of course, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always hopes, always trusts, always perseveres. Love never fails, right? So 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 through 8. And it's a really powerful scripture. I'm not necessarily going to go through all the details, but I think that is such a great starting place, and one that honestly feels like it never ends, because it's always challenging how you're encountering relationships and approaching other people, and really challenging who you're choosing to be, even in this encounter that doesn't go your way, that doesn't, turn out to be how you want it, that isn't maybe everything that you envisioned in a connection in a relationship. And it really challenges you to remain consistent in how you show up. Choosing to remain unhurried and patient and kind, even if that person has moments where they're not reflecting the same thing. It really challenges the perspective of matching energy. It really challenges the perspective of reciprocating energy. It really challenges the perspective of, playing the game of tit for tat. What you do to me, I'll do to you. It's kind of all in the same lane. How you speak to other people, how you perceive other people, it changes the way that you're aiming to discuss and speak to other people. Instead of forcing them to receive things the way you understand it, you have to humble yourself and be willing to admit that there's a way I might be communicating to this person that is actually harming them and not helping them, because they're not even able to receive what I'm telling them because of the way I'm telling it. And so I have to be humble enough to make room for them too, instead of forcing them to do everything I see and to do everything the way I want it. when it comes to relationships and connections that may not go your way, okay, so this actually challenges me to set my own temperature, right? If you think of a temperature, a thermometer in your house, right? Like that sets the temperature for the whole day, and realize when your AC obviously is working and activated, like no matter how hot or cold it could be outside, whatever temperature you set inside, that's what it's going to be. That's what's going to fill the room. It's going what's going to make it comfortable. It's what's going to make it doable compared. And there's nothing outside or external that will affect it. I think of this the same way. I get to choose to walk into any encounter and conversation and say, okay, this is the love I'm choosing to walk in. No matter if you want me, no matter if you reject me, no matter if you express the same interest in me, no matter if you want friendship, you want something distant, you want something, low maintenance, you want whatever. It doesn't have to change who I am in order to remain authentic. And even if it's not wanted to the same degree, it doesn't have to change how I move, how I live moving forward, in the sense of me still being a loving individual, me still being a consistent individual, and me still showing up to honor and preserve the right things in any connection while allowing the connection to be what it is. And I think that's a real big challenge for our culture today, considering a lot of the messages you hear on social media day in and day out, who encourage you to leave always, who tell you, and it's crazy. I had a thought about this the other morning outside of the podcast. It's a lot of people that tell you, so they tell you all day, every day, that there's nothing wrong with you and everything is wrong with other people. And it's a means of self-help. It's a means of trying to help you be uplifted from maybe a place of brokenness that you're in. So I don't want to say that the messages that they're sharing in that manner isn't coming from a well-meaning place. What I don't think is happening, though, is that there's a fair balance to actually help you grow and see that there are some behaviors you're carrying that are actually detrimental to your relationships and played a role in the relationship severing. And so maybe when we address that, we can actually have stronger ones, instead of thinking that, okay, nothing's wrong with me. There's something clearly wrong with them. And so I'm going to continue to keep these patterns and take it from person to person. But what's crazy is I'm going to build a resume of different people saying the same thing about me. And if it's not a good thing, then something's got to change. Because I do think there's different people who can say the same thing about you and it'd be a positive thing. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But when it becomes something negative and toxic, we got to address that. But instead, what are we hearing on social media? You're perfect. For the women, you're a queen, you're a boss, and that ninja tripping. For the men, you don't need them. And they're not going to do anything but use you anyway. So you might as well just go back in and get what you want out of it and play this fake macho guy to get what you want and then dip. You're encouraged to knock them off their pedestal so you can be the one they're looking up to. You're encouraged so many different messages that just don't reflect genuine relationships. And that's why we are in the midst of the most loneliest generation, depressed generation, anxious generation, and a generation that is just incapable most of the time, a lot of the time, I should say, incapable of actually conversing with people and really talking to them, getting to know them, and having the capacity to do life with people and long suffer. We don't have that. Instead, it's a one shot. We literally live by a lot of the rap lyrics we listen to unknowingly, where we only give people one shot, one chance. And once that's done, you've shown me who you are. And we ignore the body of work that shows that this person actually was loving and present. And we just hold them to that one incident, that one struggle, that one area where they failed. And because we don't make room for failure, relationships suck. So that's my rant. So I think 1 Corinthians 13, man, is a really good scripture to perhaps park for me in this conversation.
I love it, man.
Yeah,
I love it. I definitely think that's a good anchor scripture for us. Honestly, the whole series, being honest,
yeah.
As we talk about the art and science of love, I definitely want to get into what you were going through with the podcast. Keyshawn asked a great question. I'm sorry, not Keyshawn. Kane asked a good question that I think I'll jump into. Everyone did share some really good ratings. If we have some time at the end, maybe we'll dive deeper into that. Trying to keep you guys here, as short as possible. But Kane says, and he gives an example that I'll read after, but he says, I think they're one and the same instead of two questions, but how can I be full/free when there's something I want from someone and or I feel like the way I want things done would be best. A hypothetical example is, let's say I want my significant other to do A because I think it'll be easier and best, but she wants to do B instead. How can I balance wanting to do A but not clinging to it so much that it makes me feel less full / free? So great question, man. And if you guys have questions, guys, drop those down below, whether you are here on Maverick.tv, Twitch, or YouTube. We're going to get to those. That's a good question, man. And I think it assumes, well, hopefully you're thinking this, that the fullness is something that doesn't come from the relationship. And so it's work that you can even do outside of the relationship. Now, here's what I love about life and how everything can be feedback and reflect things back to you. And I love something Grape said. I got the vibes that you were almost saying, like, in certain areas, you know what to do and you even understand it. Sometimes you struggle to walk in it perfectly, though, flawlessly. And that's a lot of why Jesus just gives you the commands to do something. It doesn't sit there and necessarily explain it step by step, because I do think there is a process, and the more you follow him and do things, you learn from it and you get the insight, and some of that understanding is building as you're learning what not to do and walking some of these things out, and then our actions will eventually catch up with some of our understandings. And so don't feel bad if you're in a relationship and you know for sure that you're going about it in some of the ways we're saying you shouldn't, where you're like, yo, right now I can't even lie, my girl fills me up, my kid fills me up. I actually think those are great examples for you to actually work with this. But keep in mind that the fullness isn't, when you get it right, remember, it's not coming from anything. And so you get to practice this not clinging. You get to practice it everywhere. So not just in our relationships, you get to practice it in your business, Kane. You get to practice it at work. So when there's no one else around, but you have a certain outcome that you want and it doesn't really happen. And when you work through that and I think the process looks more like letting go than it is doing anything. So some of us will want to build up to this. And I actually think what you're working on more so is letting go, and letting go in such a skillful way, because some people will hear that and say, all right, I'm just not going to care. And it feels almost impossible to care and not cling to the result. And so now that you know this is the project, everything in your day becomes practice and exciting, and you get to work on it with every little conversation. Because when you're mindful, you'll notice, hey, I got certain expectations when I'm walking into conversations. It could be at work, something simple with your boss, something as subtle as you might be expecting them to be respectful. And you may not even notice it until they say something a little bit short and rude, and you feel something leave you. You're like, oh, whoa, I'm not okay that you did that. That is your chance to not try to build up to anything, but just let that go, that offense go. And you've done a lot of work in your mindfulness and meditation, Kane. So you kind of get it, this idea of just breathing through it and trying to zoom your entire perspective out. And the more you do that day by day, you're going to notice that you're almost just waking up with a default zoomed out view. And when you do it on the micro level every day, on a macro level, you start to zoom out and you stop seeing things in such a finite window of things. And so to your point that you said, hey, maybe I think A is the best way to go instead of B. And Grape even hinted at this too. Your perspective on what's best changes completely when you change the timing. Because think about it. A lot of what we want people to do and the things that the ways we want people to think, we think it's best if they just understand it as soon as we say it and they just get it. And it's like, hey, I said it, or I encouraged you, or I gave you advice. You should get it now. But can't bring that back to your life. I can say this because I'm actually your coach. Ninjas don't always get things the first time they say it, right? And we have this idea where we want to judge everyone else off the cold hard facts of their life, and but we want to be judged off our intentions. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's different for me. And it's like, no, no, no. When you meditate on that, they're like, okay, yo, I've had a process. I didn't get things off rip the first time. And sometimes you're grateful for that, because just like I was explaining earlier, it takes you actually walking through some things to really get things on a deeper level. And so sometimes that's what other people are going through. And you might be like, well, Dion, I still just don't know if that's what's best. Look at how God approaches things, and look at how he approaches you in your life. And there is this intense amount of patience and long suffering, because guess what? You can be a lot more patient when you aren't hoping people change selfishly. Like, I mean, like from your selfish perspective, you're not in a rush. God don't need you to change by Tuesday, because whether you change or not, he's full and he's good. And so the more you work on letting that grip go and not clinging as much, of course you want the people to change. You don't need it to be on Tuesday, and you don't need it to be even in the method that that you might prescribe, because you have such a humility to life that you know that God can work some of the craziest situations in some of the crazy ways. And so just because something isn't going by the books, you don't think God isn't part of it. And you kind of start to trust the process. When we get to the freedom part, you give people the freedom to learn at their pace. And the last analogy I'll give you is it's very similar to that pond analogy, where we try to get our hands in there and muddy and smooth things out for people. And I think there's a lot of things that God has under control, and it just may be playing out in years. But we get in there and trying to fix the ripples, and we're like, yo, I can help them in a week. I can help them in a month. And we end up doing way more harm than good. And so, and shoot, and Shane, Kane, I don't think you would mind me sharing this part, but something you said in a recent message, you was like, yo, I'm not used to people being so patient with me when you were talking to me, and you're talking to me, Kane. And it's because I've had to just learn, man, like I could stunt people's growth trying to force it at a certain timing, and I know some of my best growth didn't happen module 1, module 2, module 3 style, right? It was a little bit shaky and a little bit of all around the place. And then just the more you embrace this infinite game, you realize there is no finite destination. So you stop rushing. And so think about it. Like when you can really be full, that answers everything, not just your relationships, but it's just like whether your Amazon package is delayed or someone's breakthrough is delayed. You're not living life for people to have a breakthrough or to get Amazon packages. The game is so much bigger. And I'll leave that there. Great. Anything you want to throw on that?
I think that's beautiful, man. It kind of reminded me. So I'm just kind of looking at this question, how can I be full free when there's something I want from someone? I feel like the way I want things done would be best. I even think of maybe even more like a smaller, like the smaller things. Like, no, I think you should take this route. She thinks she should take this route, or the small day-to-day things. And I think that is something that you weigh the importance of. Okay, how important is it really for me to get it my way, and can the main goal still be accomplished even if my way isn't what's chosen? So I think you also have to consider that in the day-to-day decisions. Is kind of how I would approach that question. But, I think what you mentioned there is so dope, because, God sees things from an aerial view that we can't comprehend on a level view, and there's a lot of things that when we're in the midst of it, maybe it's a struggling season, a relationship, there's a lot of tension, or there's separation and distance, and there's some things that are happening and we just really don't know why. Like God just has a greater scope and view on what this is doing for you, and even how this could impact relationships that you either connect that are new in the future, or that you reconnect at a different time and space later on. And it's a really beautiful thing. Like when I think about reconciliation and process, something that again, like we just don't hear on an everyday level in messaging today in today's content. Like that is so it's actually really mind blowing to me. Not in the sense that I never thought it could happen, but to think that, you know, if you were ever in a space where you were reconciled to a relationship that you thought at one point would never come back, or, you know, maybe you just never put any thought to it because of how things fell out or how things, you know, separated. And to see that, you know, in that opportunity, if that opportunity ever came where reconciliation was granted and a relationship was restored, to see and look back, wow, like God actually was able to create something through us distancing, something that maybe both of us were afraid to do. And yet there was so much fruit that came out of it. And so it kind of made me think of that, because even from a distancing perspective, a breakup perspective, a splitting perspective, but even more so from aspects of, you know, just having maybe disagreements or something that isn't really seen on the same page. God sees so much more behind the scenes from an aerial view about those things. And so I think when you do have a foundation in Christ, and when you do genuinely build that relationship with him, he gives you glimpses of how he sees things in bite-sized portions and in process. Because you know, we don't get it all in that moment. You know, there's a reason why when you experience certain things, you look back and you're like, God, I now understand a little bit better on why you let that happen. It's because if he were to give you that in the moment, you wouldn't have been able to even receive it. Now you're able to receive it because of the things that he was doing in you between the season of struggle and valley and the season of abundance and seeing things in its best light. And so that's kind of something I thought of too. And I think that works in friendships and relationships too. It's just like, okay, I may not necessarily get my way here, but I don't have to be impacted so greatly that I now step out of character and I'm no longer able to honor this person that God has deemed is one of his, a child of his, made in his image and likeness. And I have to still be willing to hold attention and honor that. You know, I think there's a thought from the podcast I was listening to earlier where, you know, I think as she was ending some of the thoughts, Megan, I'm not going to quote her correctly fully, but she just made mention that, you know, in the midst of separation or any hard conversations that are necessary, I have to first see this person as someone God made. That's got to be it. I can't go about any kind of hard conversation and make it so much about me that I no longer choose to consider this person where they are, who they are, and make room for that. This doesn't mean that I have to protect feelings. I do want to be honest, but there's a way to be honest and graceful. There's a way to communicate where you are, how you feel, and where you see things going or how you need things to be in order for this to continue. And there's a way to communicate and understand that maybe this isn't a place where I can get that. And that's okay. And I need to maybe change course. I might need to rethink this connection in terms of the level of depthness that we're willing to go, all those kinds of things. But I need to really, in the case of relationships that may absolutely need to separate, there's a way to do that. And I want to consider who this person is in God's eyes before anything, because then I'm able to honor God and that person. As you know, compared to, okay, you don't see things my way, well, then you're just lame and you don't see things, and all of these like self-righteous comments that we could easily make, that in the process of doing such demeans the person in front of us, and we add more struggle to them. We don't actually, you know, give ourselves an opportunity to help them through it, to ease it in a way that they can receive it, digest it, and understand us while we understand them, and we're on the same page. So I really like those thoughts for sure.
That's good.
Yeah.
I almost thinking of a couple questions that we could bring out of that. Maybe we'll formulate those after we get to Keyshawn, who had a good question here. I want to get your thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. So he says, a question on fruitfulness. Does that mean constantly reaching out and being met with the cold shoulder? Something like, even if they're kind of being cold, do we still keep the energy? At that point, that's where freedom kicks in. And I think it can become toxic. I understand there is a balance of boundaries and allowing people to be free.
I think that's a
I don't
good
know if you had any
question.
thoughts. You want me to warm it up?
Yeah, I think I can warm it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts afterwards. I think I want to be careful, man. I want to be careful. It's crazy because having relationship conversations, there's so many angles that you can take, and so many conversations that I think are necessary that obviously you can't have in one moment. But I want to be careful when we use the term toxic. I think that's a term that's used too much, man. And I'm not saying that that's your approach key, but I just think it's worth considering that not everything that is met with a cold shoulder or that is not met with the same energy that we're giving, it doesn't automatically mean that the situation is toxic or that that person is toxic. I think there can be a lot of miscommunications. I think there can be a lot of misunderstandings. I also think, too, that there can be a lot of misalignment of expectations. And because of that, and maybe we're giving energy to something that isn't met with the same energy. Again, I'm going to refer back to this podcast. She made mention of some statistics. I'm going to link it in the True Project Discord. I really think it's something you guys should check out. Now, again, a lot of the things that she does talk to are geared towards women, but I think it's enough to just give some broader perspectives on maybe better, directions to take in friendships specifically, because those relationships tend to be left behind as we get older. But what she says in there is so interesting because she's like, how people really navigate them is unique in their own ways. And gosh, I said all that and I feel like I lost my train of thought. I'll come back to it. Maybe I'll remember it. But the point that I'm trying to make in all of this is a lot of times they're just miscues, miscommunications, misalignments of expectations, and we have to be able to manage them better in order to really gauge the room and gauge the conversation. So does that mean constantly reaching out, and being met with a cold shoulder can gain fruitfulness? I'm gonna be honest, man. I'm not saying I wouldn't necessarily encourage anybody. Like if somebody is constantly not answering you, I don't necessarily think it's beneficial for you to continue texting them in the manner that you may want to. I do think that if you start seeing that, you might want to just your next text, instead of trying to be general with things, maybe you address it. Like, hey, I'm noticing, there isn't really too much conversation going on here. Feels like there's been kind of a disconnect somewhere. Is everything good? Where are we? Those kinds of things. I think that's a really good way of opening that door and inviting conversation into it. And if that is still met with a cold shoulder, then I think in a lot of ways you do know what you have in that. And I think it's time to really peel back the expectation that you may have wanted to throw on that relationship and just say, man, this is just where it is. And even though I don't know what's going on here, it's not something that I necessarily have to carry so much stress over, especially if it's a relationship that's early on. Now, I know that the case of ghosting and things like that is a real deal. And I don't encourage ghosting. I think ghosting, and a lot of times, is a form of brokenness. I really do. I think ghosting in and of itself is now, unless, the need for ghosting is because you need to be protected. Like this person is harassing you, is threatening you, you're in bodily harm, your life is in danger. Anything outside of that, I think a lot of times that just shows that there's an inability to communicate something, whether you're afraid of how they'll receive it. I'm afraid of how things are going to fall out if I do mention this, those kinds of things. And so you want to be mindful of that. And I think it's important, again, from the podcast, she says, I think it's cool to lead with that. I've never thought about that. Like leading with maybe what you're afraid of happening by way of addressing what you need to address. Hey, I really want to talk with you. I'm just really afraid that if I did bring this up, this is going to be the result. We disconnect. We no longer have friendship. We no longer have community. And so I really want to preserve that to the best of my ability and still have this conversation with you, because I do think it's something that's really important. And I think it's something we should address to make the most of this connection. And then you lead in with the conversation. You've invited them to be diligent. You get to see how they're going to respond to the things that you care about and have that conversation in a very mature way. But again, to just initially address the point, I don't encourage you to continue to reach out. And I do think there can be fruitfulness to gain from it. in the sense that you kind of get to see where you are and what exactly you feel you need this person to be in order for you to continue to do something right, moving beyond this relationship. So, if you're sending messages to this person who first expressed interest in you or you first connected with, conversations were okay in the beginning, they were good enough for you to remain and continue to talk. And then all of a sudden you just got a wall of blue text of nothing but your messages being sent and none of them are being responded to. I don't think it's a beneficial thing to just continue sending messages. Again, address it. And if you don't get a response from there, I think you know what you have. But you do get to see in the midst of something like that happening, like in the middle of it, you do get to see, okay, like, what all am I really doing this for? Like, am I really being genuine in the love I'm trying to offer this person or the love that I feel like I'm showing up to with this person? Does this person no longer mean anything to me and I'm able to just throw them? Am I able to find myself just throwing them away because they're no longer giving me what I want? Well, then I think we also learn in that space, which can become fruitful and beneficial in the sense of being aware, okay, I wasn't really actually loving genuinely here. And this relationship was void of commitment for me because I needed them to be something consistently all day, every day. And now that they're showing me that they weren't, well, now I don't care about them. I think that's a stretch, right? I don't think that's something you really want to land with. And I think it's really a big struggle. So, I don't think you should continue to do that. I do think it's fruitfulness to gain. But I do think there's even more fruit in gaining, more fruit and benefit in separating from such an individual, and letting that relationship be what it is and where it is. If that's where it is, I'm being met with a cold shoulder. Okay. I mean, I don't really know why. And maybe I don't always have to know why because I know who I am and how I'm approaching. But oftentimes, again, people, it's so weird, man. People really assume when you meet them or when you build some kind of soft connection with them in some kind of way, there's like this hidden expectation for you to know how they move and why they do what they do in everything they do. And people have a tendency of ghosting or doing that kind of stuff and then just expect you to know why. And it's like, well, no, I didn't really know that me saying this actually triggered something in you, but because you didn't communicate it, how was I supposed to know? How was I supposed to know? And so, there's a lot of nuances in there, but hopefully that thought kind of made sense. I wouldn't continue to press it. You kind of know where you're at if you're met with a cold shoulder. And it's not necessarily something that's always equating to toxicity. It can just be miscues, miscommunications. Someone on some end isn't able to communicate where they are and how they feel. And so sometimes the best result out of fear is to ghost, is to walk away, is to meet you with a cold shoulder, to avoid addressing anything that's actually at the root, which shows that they may not be prepared. And in some ways, they don't feel that they can comprehensively carry a relationship, a connection the way you may want it. And so something to consider. What are your thoughts on it? And how did you hear that question?
Yeah, I don't have too much different than what you're saying. He did follow up. I don't know if you caught his message where he said, "My bad on me not communicating that I meant misrepresentation of expectations on my end. Like, we'll fluff them if they don't want to talk to me." So I'm guessing.
Okay.
I don't know if you hear that a little bit different. I still feel like a lot of what you said covers that. I think it can just be nuanced. Obviously, what type of relationship you're in. And I think Nick kind of asked a question that is similar to it that I think maybe expands on it, and we can address that. Because he says, I don't know if my message went through, but what if instead of framing it as toxic, we just use the term negative? So at what point does our fruitfulness and our freedom meet when the outcome of the relationship becomes negative? And I said, maybe give me some examples of negative. He says, well, if fruitfulness is defined as getting mutual positive outcomes, which I want to stop. That's not how I was defining it in the video, but I'll go back to that. But I don't think that's bad. I just think, how can we know what that is in some situations? But he says, what if the fruit is mutual negative outcomes? whether there is verbal abuse in terms of blaming, yelling, hateful speech. Like, what do we do with fruit of people not responding positively to us? Like, if you share the gospel with a coworker and they meet you with backlash on something. I love that, Nick. Thank you for that. And I think it gives me the opportunity to clarify some things. I would hope for us. Well, one, again, remember, fruitful. My perspective on that was making sure that we're just mindful in our relationships, because there is a fruit to every action we make. So I want us to think of like, okay, good. Is it like an internet thing? My camera?
It's like, yeah, it's like pixelated and
A little bit
choppy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My bad, y'all, for any camera issues. Can you hear me smooth at all?
Absolutely. No, we can hear you good.
Yeah. Okay, cool. On Grape's turn, I might jump up out the call and come back. Hopefully that smooths it out. But and so I'll try to be brief here so you guys aren't looking at a slideshow. But so think like we have a thought, that thought produces an action, and that action produces a fruit. Right. And then so sometimes we cannot be as mindful of what our actions are producing in a relationship. And so I want us to be mindful and so full that we almost start to blur the lines in terms of what's negative. So an example that you gave, let's say I do share the gospel with someone and they, throw a bunch of curse words at me, blame me, whatever. My question would be, why does that have to be negative? And I could just like sit there in silence and we really think on that. But it's like, if you are full, all right, and maybe this might just be easy for me as like a content creator, and I get cussed out every day and made fun of every day from every angle. But maybe some of us have had situations where things were a little bit hostile. Someone was upset with us and we didn't get upset or didn't take it serious. And I think that's possible. A younger version of me didn't know that was possible, but it 100% is. And man, just let's think about it. I can think of conversations I've had where people were offended, they were upset, they were maybe even angry at first, but things changed and things turned around. And I know you married, Nick. I'm sure you didn't had a couple conversations like that with your wife, where she may start off hostile or upset. And is it negative? Is it bad? Or is that actually good because you're getting an insight to where her heart is at and what's bothering her? And some guys might be like, oh, she's tripping. She's nagging. There she is being a witch, right? Or are you like, hey, I'm grateful for that. Thank you for not holding that in. Thank you for sharing that. Because now, and if you can still be okay, if you didn't need her to not yell at you for you to be okay, or her to not have an attitude for you to be okay, it actually makes it good. And some of these things that are negative, I don't think you take as serious. You're not as intimidated by, because you know where they come from, or they have to come from somewhere, because that it's just the fruit of something else. And so you're almost willing to backtrack that and be a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more understanding. And so fruitfulness isn't saying, because here's the thing, y'all, there can be certain situations you don't know that you could even will it to and I'm air quoting when I say win-win situation. You may not necessarily know what that is. And that doesn't mean we don't intend to do the best that we know in a situation. But like you're saying, I could be extremely nice and kind to someone and they don't want to reciprocate that. And you may be thinking like, is that really a win-win? I don't know if it is. I don't know if it is or not. I think our goal though is just to be mindful. It's like, all right, was I loving? Was I allowing their energy to throw me off and cause me to not be full? And here's the thing, like, I think when you're full, man, you really, really struggle to see bad people. You struggle to see negative things. I think it's a Chinese proverb. I've heard it quoted to a few other things, so it's got me on the edge. I don't want to misquote things, but you guys have heard me tell the parable about, I just call it Maybe. And it's about a father that has a young man, and they're trying to tame some horses, and their horses run. One of their horses runs away, like their most prized horse. And the son is like, Dad, oh no, our horse ran away. How horrible. And the dad was like, maybe. because we just genuinely don't know. Is it bad? Is it good? Next day, the horse comes back. It found some other wild horses, and now they have, more horses for the stable, more money, more horsepower, whatever you want to call it. And so now the kid was like, "Oh, Dad, psych! It was actually a good thing. Look, he brought us more wealth, more power." And the dad was like, "Maybe." The next day, the son was out there trying to tame the new horses, ends up falling, breaking his leg. And the son was like, "Man, Dad, I guess it actually was bad because look, now I'm hurt. I thought it was good. Silly me." The dad was like, "Maybe." Okay. Next day, they find out the country's going to war. They're doing a draft. Everyone the son's age is now getting enlisted into the army, except him because he's got a broke leg. And he's like, "Dad, it was a great thing." Right. And you see how it's just like, maybe. I don't know. And so I think we have a humility to everything that we're going about and that we're doing. And sometimes something may seem negative, and like, what is the negative? Maybe they're raising their voice, they're saying mean words, and that could be an invitation to seeing where their heart is at. And you may think something like a day ended and the problem wasn't resolved. Is that bad? Or did it get moved forward? Or was a seed planted? Like when we read our Bible, it really challenges us to think about, is something good? Is something bad? Like, because we just see God working all things together for the good of those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And so you see some of the most character building moments in our lives. At least for me, I don't know. Some of y'all be learning lessons through like goodness and like good behavior. A lot of my lessons I collected on a journey of fluffing up, pain, messing up. And then on the other end, if I'm able to teach people, help my kids, help you guys, was it bad? Yes, no. When I went through it, I might have said it now. And that's the thing. Your time horizon and how you view things is such different. And that's what that father understood in that parable. Is it bad? Is it good? Is it negative? Is it, and the same goes for positive, right? It's like, you enjoy the process. It is what it is. And that's closer to where I think we're trying to get. And so we can always be fruitful. Doesn't mean it's necessarily win-win. And I'm not trying to say we don't go for that. I just want to be clear on that, Nick. If you can see a clear win-win, of course that's the objective. But it's more of like, I'm already in win. Like I've already won. So I'm not trying to get me to a win-win situation. It's like I'm full. I've won. And so let me see this situation through that lens. All right. And then you had at one point on, just the freedom. Right. And so, yeah, I think when we look at it from this perspective, and a little thought for you, Keyshawn, is like, it just depends. Like from that perspective, then, yeah, if someone's being cold and you have the perspective where you might know why, you don't even have the audacity to be like, "Oh, well, Fluff, you didn't." Where's the offense? I didn't. You were excited, man. I promise you, like, if I called you right now, Keyshawn, and I was like from the some national lottery, and I'm like, "Bro, you won $10 billion. I promise you, it would be so hard to piss you off these next 24 hours. I could be like, "Keyshawn, your whole car blew up. Essays came and said, and essays came and said they're gonna beat you up if you ever go back to your job." And you'd be like, "Bro, fluff them, fluff that car. Tell them essays. You hire some bodyguards. You do whatever you want." And you would have this big, abundant perspective. And I think we can hit that same place in our heart to where it's like, man, I wasn't living for that one thing that I'm trying to zoom in and make my life about anyway. I'm grateful for this entire experience. Okay. Let me know if that made sense. If you have any thoughts on that. And I'll leave it there and try to fix my camera.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for that. I think that's really good. And Twister, I see you followed up. I definitely get what you're saying. I agree, especially with my wife. But what about if they burn a bridge on their end? Like your side of the bridge is wide open for them to come back, but their side is torched from the encounter. So if we go back to the first example of a coworker, if that causes them not to talk to us anymore, or continues to be hostile after the fact, would that be a negative outcome long term? I know we talked about negative short term. Yeah, I kind of hope maybe what he landed on, and when he comes back, he can definitely drop more thoughts on it. I hope maybe what you got from it was more of like, I think that, because there are so many outcomes that can follow up the initial outcome that we have, I think sometimes we almost assume that can be a negative thing long term from that very moment. We just assume it's going to remain that way. And I don't know, man. I think I would maybe caution to this example for me, like, or maybe I'll just raise this to Nick and everybody else, man. Like, if y'all remember the first relationships y'all had, you know what I'm saying? Like, if y'all remember the first dating relationship that you had, camera's good now. Like, the breakup sucked, especially if you were the one, if you were broken up with. Like, it sucked. Like, that didn't feel good at all at any point of that process. But now being where you are today, it's hard to say that relationship that is no longer available, bridges were quote unquote burned. It's hard to say that still carries a negative impact on your life. Not saying that it can't. And I think for those that it does, I think it speaks more to it speaks more to an unhealed wound internally from that separation that I think is still worth working through, but it doesn't mean it has to remain negative long term. If I'm hearing it correctly in what you're saying, what I would suggest is that because where you have now reached, maybe perhaps not all the way due to that separation or bridge burned, but the lessons that you got from experiencing what it's like to have a bridge burn and how you're going to respond to it the next time a situation like that happens. Or perhaps you learned so much about that individual that you learned what you may not want in another person, or you may not want to see in a friend, you may not want to see in that. I think that's how it turns positive. And I think for me, it's a struggle to perhaps keep something that was initially a negative impact on your life because of what you felt you were losing. It's hard for me to say it has to stay there. I think there's so many lessons that you can grab from those things that actually turns it into a positive thing. And it's not to say that you were grateful that it happened in the moment. It still sucked. It still was awful. It still was painful. It was bad for the moment. Now that I'm on the other side, though, I'm not going to say it was so bad, because what I learned about me, what I learned about what is in me, the capacity I have in me to perhaps engage with that again, if it were to happen again, to engage with that person in a better way. If the first time I didn't really handle it the best way, maybe it's, again, if we go back to the coworker, yeah, for sure, Nick. And it's like, okay, maybe with the coworker, they went off and cussed at you. Okay, so yeah, I kind of learned from that one response what's in your heart, perhaps what's in your heart. And maybe I don't get the opportunity currently because you're not even putting yourself in position to receive it. And here's the kicker: Christ himself doesn't even force the gospel on us, and he knows it's the greatest gift we could ever have as a human race. He knows that, and yet doesn't force it on us. I think that speaks so much to his love. So maybe next time, if I were to share the gospel and I had an intention of sharing the gospel with a coworker who I can tell probably may not have an encounter with Christ or doesn't know a whole lot about him, and I just want to be a conduit of God's love there, instead of maybe approaching them with the gospel first, I kind of want to connect with them on what they like. Where are you at? What do you like to do? What do you like to talk about? I start kind of showing interest in their interests. We're able to build some kind of surface level bond that gives me an entryway to one day, with time and with genuine care of that individual, boom. And now their heart now, instead of perhaps getting that coworker to cuss like they did before, maybe they're like, you know what, bro? I didn't think of it like that. And there's so many aspects that you're speaking to regarding their life that has a gospel perspective behind it. They may not even see it, but they see that what you're sharing has value and it works. And they might want to continue learning more and more. So boom, there we have it, right? And so I think, man, yeah, I don't think it all has to remain negative. Again, for me, something I've learned from severing relationships that are no longer present. Maybe we grew apart. We're just in different lanes of life, and there's no ill will about it, or perhaps it just wasn't what we may have wanted. It's really hard for me to continue to look at that and be mad. It's really hard for me to look at that and remain in a salty position and perspective, or wishing that things were to go the way I wanted it to. Because then what I do is I choose to hold on to what I wanted instead of what is. I'm no longer able to live forward. I'm no longer able to embrace that person for who they are. I'm no longer able to even really give that person the opportunity to be who they are. Like, oftentimes we look at those situations and we look at it we label it as the worst negative outcome possible because of what we feel we're losing in that person or in that connection, which is fair. But I asked the question, and I'm going to start kind of asking more and more questions like this because I love it, because I just think it gets people to think. Have you ever thought of a breakup or a separation to be the beginning of a breakthrough you've actually been asking for? Have you ever considered that maybe that is the beginning? I'll put it this way. It was that separation and that distancing that caused you to get pregnant. Figuratively speaking, of course, like pregnant with purpose, pregnant with capacity, pregnant with the ability to learn more about you that you didn't even know.
I was like, quantify that. You just threw Keyshawn off.
Yeah, my fault, OG. I don't want you to. No, you don't need to take no P test, brother. You gonna come back negative every time. But it's like, it's like, yeah, like you got pregnant with so much stuff, man. Like, that actually showed you. Like, I did not know what was in me until I went through some of these things, bro. I just didn't. I didn't know I had the capacity to still love somebody beyond what they're currently showing me until I got into a situation where it wasn't favorable, and I was still able to preserve Christ and his love. I was still able to be kind and loving. I was still able to be consistent. I didn't know I had it in me. I always used to carry a perspective way back when, and I act like I'm old, but it was like literally 5-6 years ago. I used to carry the perspective of like, man, people only got one shot with me. Never realizing that what was actually in me that created that narrative was a fear of commitment, a fear of actually journeying with somebody and being vulnerable and open enough to actually create some kind of connection and community that would last, that causes me to put myself on Front Street and invite them to do the same, trusting each other with where we're at, with who we're becoming, and be in the process of growing that connection. I was afraid of that. That's what prompted that narrative. So now here I am looking back on it, and I'm like, shoot, if it wasn't for me experiencing people walk out of my life and that anxious attachment showing up in me, I would have not even been aware that that was present, to then be able to address it, to now grow into a different perspective where I'm more secure in who I am. And I'm more secure in what I have to offer. And it doesn't always mean that the person that decided something else was better for them than what was here, that they have to be a negative person, an evil person, and somebody that's nasty and just, ew, I don't care for them. And I have to be so disrespectful and distasteful to them. And I think what I'm really hoping that we may be able to walk away with from this conversation are two things. One, that we are able to make room for people and all of people. And I think when you deal with people, you're going to deal with failures. You're going to deal with disappointments. And if you don't make room for that, I think you actually reveal that you have more of a lack of understanding of your relationship to Christ than you portray. Because God makes room for our failures every day. I mean, it's not a day that goes by that our failures are not placed in front of God. In fact, the devil is in front of God accusing us all day, every day. And yet God makes room for us, man. And so I think about that, right? So when you think about relationships, understand that you're dealing with humanity. And in the process of dealing with humanity, it's going to get messy. And you have to, again, I'm going to refer back to this podcast just because it's the most recent thing I watched. She said she has a book regarding relationships, and I'll hopefully I'll remember the link and drop that in the Discord as well. But she said so many people are so focused on leaving relationships, they never raise the question, how can I stay? what do I need to do to stay? I know I can leave easily. I know I can separate easily, but what is there to do that would allow me to stay? Now, this, again, you have to hear this, and these conversations are very nuanced. You have to hear this through the lens of your specific scenario that you may be thinking about, but also through the context of what's being said. If you're in such a toxic relationship that you're being verbally, physically, mentally, spiritually abused, that's not applied to you in any kind of way. But to the people who are considering to leave because deep down you don't feel you're getting what you're wanting, because you feel that something just isn't quite right. Well, this relationship isn't really what I wanted it to be because it's not really filling me. It's not really serving me. It's not really, like, we keep thinking of all these things of why this isn't for me. We don't ask, what are we doing for them in return? So I think it's important to consider that. But then secondly, I think we have to make room for failure. We have to make room for failure. I think that was the first point. I got to remember the second point. Gosh, my mind is just going blank all day. But I just think processing those things are really important, man. In order to really maximize relationships in the best way. So yeah. Now, if I think of the second point, I'll drop it in the Discord. My mind's blank.
Okay. Hey, no worries. I think that's spot on. And I think that's a good spot for us to start our descent here. I think we were going to end in under 2 hours, so I'm proud of us. I thought we had a good pace. It's already 90 minutes, but time flies when you're chasing truth, having fun. If you have any last thoughts, definitely drop those in there. But I got Luke on his way. And I think this was a good conversation, man. We will be wrapping it up, the series up next week with the last dimension of faith. But yeah, I like that. So I guess maybe to wrap it up, man, what are some, I know we got applications in the notes and all those kinds of things, but what kind of maybe specifically to some of the stuff that was addressed in tonight's conversation, what would you say something is worth applying to everyone in here, from, fruitfulness to kind of how we view certain situations that may initially not be favorable to us? How would you say we would go about that applicably? Viewing them, like some practical stuff to take from things that feel negative. Yeah. And feel negative, or I would say that. Yeah. Man, I want us to end the moment, y'all. Is my camera still trash, by the way? No, you're good. Beautiful. Love it. Again, it sounds overly I'm overly simplifying it, but I promise you, like most things, it's just fundamental. I think one of the craziest things about life, I actually saw a quote. I think it said, one of the hardest things about life is that God made it so simple. And anyone that has chased truth, you realize, like, sometimes life can feel so complicated. There's so many thoughts. There's so many perspectives on life, and you can feel so overwhelmed. But I actually think death is beautiful in the way that when you meditate on it and you think of some of the things that you're worried about most. And something I picked up from Hormozy that I think is really cool is reading obituaries. Like, people be dying everywhere, so there's no shortage of them. But like, when you see how people will summarize your life into a couple paragraphs, some of the people that you care about the most will grieve for a little bit, but because they have to, they will move on, man. They will move on. I'm talking about everybody. I know of a mother that lost her 5-year-old daughter, and of course she still feels sad thinking about that. Of course it was painful, but she also has 3 other kids, and so she can't make the rest of her life grieving over this 5-year-old. She has to move on. I don't know if you guys have been old enough, alive long enough to see certain marriages be great and then they end. I've even seen women become widowed and they are heartbroken to a million pieces, and they swore they would never get married again. That was the love of their life. They would never find someone else. They found someone else. I promise you, y'all. Yeah. And it's this idea that some of the things, you can do that, or you can even look back to the last year of your life. Think of some of the things that had you up at night, stressed out the most, and look at your perspective on them now. And you really start to realize, like, yo, I am the one complicating this. I am the one creating so many of these narratives that are like squeezing the life out of me. And with enough patience and enough time, and you just watching that loop over and over again, and you just even trying it out, like, you know what, let me just stop clinging to some of these situations as much. And you realize they can be just as fruitful, just as fun. And you actually have more fun when you're not clinging to them. And so it's a very day-to-day process, but it's in everything, y'all. We talked about relationships today, but I promise you, you're clinging to your fantasy team and the fact that you got the 4th pick instead of the 2nd pick. That's an opportunity from God. God's like, damn. And you think it's just random, and you're waiting for church so that you can experience purpose. And I'm like, fam, that is purpose. Please enjoy your league. We don't have to be monks. We don't got to go to the mountains. Do everything you're doing now. Just stop clinging, and you notice everything will have purpose to it. And day by day, you'll progress. Man, someone that actually I think does this beautiful, and he could have gave himself more points today, is great. He was sharing a win he had today that I promise you takes people years. I've watched people struggle with something that he and not to say he's fully overcame it, but he's pretty much there. Anytime he goes back to it, it's him picking it back up, and it doesn't have him anymore. And he did it in less than 2 weeks. But I've seen people struggle with the same thing for 2 decades. And that is the opportunity that all of us have in front of us every single day. But I also watch see the meaning in very small things that some people would bypass. And he realized that, no, this is everything. And that's why he can move quickly. And I think it's the same for all of us. Please, you're going to get off this call and something's going to happen after. You're going to talk to somebody. You're going to jump on a game. You're going to watch a show. I promise you there's still meaning to it. Some of y'all are clinging to your shows too much. Man, my wife, she will hate characters in person that she watched a show on.
I feel that.
We went to a NBA party that was for her, or NBA Live, when she was in the game. And whoever the ninja from Power is, I forget his actual name, but like he was there.
Is it like Chad Hardwick or something like that?
Yes, something like that. And she kind of felt some sort of, she was like, they really invited this ninja? I was like, yo, that's not Ghost. That's not, like, let that dude be him. And like they were playing like a little basketball game. He kind of like crossed up and like blocked real bad. And you could tell she was like, yeah, that's what he gets. I was like, he's not doing no way. He's actually a really cool, chill dude.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And so that was a form of clinging, you know. And some of us, we need to, college started today. Colorado's playing, you know what I mean? Whoever, some of y'all favorite teams, that's a moment. It's purpose. I promise you, enjoy that game. Love it. Root for them. And then when if they lose, like, dang it. It was cool though. I enjoyed it. Now I'm on to the next thing. And that is practice in its own for your breakup, for the person that's offending you at work. I promise you all that stuff comes together. If
that's
you will
beautiful.
allow it. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I second all of that. I think I'm going to say this last thing. This is a piece that came from the podcast. I think it's worth sharing. And I definitely won't be long at all. It's actually pretty simple. She gave an acronym for really just navigating relationships. And obviously they're speaking in the context of specifically friendships, which I think should be something that we talk about even specifically here. Because I do think that is a lost art, man. Especially as you grow older and transition in life. A lot of people think that, man, once I get this significant other, that's not just my, spouse, that's my best friend, which is very true. I think they could be the same in one, but that does not negate the fact that you still need community. And it can be harder to build that when you get older, of course. But this is something that she kind of puts in an acronym in terms of filing your relationships, right? Everybody's looking through, she kind of puts in an analogy of files. Everybody's looking for it, looking for something specific to just maybe look through, to analyze, anything of that sort. So each letter stands for something. So F stands for fear, right? And so it's really it's an analyzing of you in your relationships and where you're going with them, your approach to your relationships. So what are you afraid of is really the question that you should ask when it comes to the fear, right? Because sometimes that you can because fear responds in a couple ways. You can either detach, right? So, hey, I got a sense that this person is rejecting me, so I'm just going to leave before they even get a chance to. Or you can respond to fear by leaning in. Oh, this person is looking like they're trying to leave. I want to hold on to them, cling as much as I can, so that way they don't leave. Right? There's a expectation of fear, a spectator of fear present. So what are you afraid of at the core root that is leading you to navigate and move in relationships that way? But then you have identity. So you need to understand who you are. Okay, this is in any relationship that you create, because if you don't understand who you are, we've all heard the comment saying that if you don't know who you are, other people will tell you who you are. But even in that, you have to be willing to be understanding of not just what we say today, what you bring to the table. No, I need you to know who you are, what you stand for, your values, all those kinds of things. Because you have to be willing, in order to make room in relationships and to make room for other people, you can't find yourself being so attached to them that if they were to leave, dissipate, or anything of that sort, that now that all of a sudden that changes who you are, right? You have to learn to be authentic. What's your identity? What's it rooted in? Who's it rooted in, right? That's a stable foundation. For us, of course, as believers, we know our identity ultimately comes from Christ. And so that actually leads to the conversation that we had tonight, right? Like, your identity will allow you to be able to know, okay, am I clinging to this person or this relationship because I think that there's something I can get from them? Or, does this saying something about me? I need them to be a certain way in order to have them. And I know I may not get this all the way. If you guys listen to the podcast, she'll definitely explain it in a lot better ways, but this is kind of what I got from it. Love, which is the L, right? So what do you define love to be? What does that mean to you? Because in order for you to actually have really strong communication or strong relationships, and the ones that are long lasting, you have to really be able to communicate how you love and how you receive love, because perhaps how you loved one person isn't the same way you need to love another in order for them to feel loved. And maybe what this one person does for you is the same thing that another person can do for you and carry the same meaning. And so being able to communicate that is really healthy. But at first you got to know, what does that mean for you? What does it look like for you to be loved by somebody else, in a platonic friendship, community, brotherhood, or if you do end up being in a romantic relationship, what does that look like as well? And then expectation, right? So that's the E. What is needed? What is needed from you or for you in this relationship? And when you look at your expectations, we kind of hinted at it earlier. Oftentimes we do find ourselves upset at relationships or at people because they aren't meeting a threshold that we've set or that we expect for everybody to fall under, when in reality, we find ourselves getting upset when people are even able to give their all, but because we're at gallon capacities and they're only at pint capacities, we find ourselves frustrated. And so you have to be able to ask yourself, what is the need? And then when you analyze your relationships, okay, what is this person showing and revealing that they have the capacity to fill that need? By the way that they're talking to me, by the way that they interact with me, by the space that they're able to hold for me, do they show that they have the capacity to be that for me? And if they don't, well, it's unfair for me to force them to create that capacity. It's literally like going to a vending machine that reads out of order, but we ignore it and we continue to put our money in there to get the Snicker bar that we see at the bottom because we're really hungry. And then when the vending machine eats our money and doesn't spit out the product that we were asking for, and then we find ourselves cheated and upset, well, we're kicking the vending machine when the whole time we're expecting something that's dysfunctional to operate correctly. That is more towards people who are in lanes of brokenness, more so than people who just don't have the capacity to be what you're asking them to be. Not everybody that doesn't have the capacity doesn't mean that they're broken. It just means that there's some things that they're trying to juggle, and maybe they don't have that kind of space for that level of a friendship, maybe with you specifically or just in general. And either way, it's not really something for me to figure out. I just need to know where you're at, right? Really understanding where you're at. So manage your expectations. Be mindful of what you're expecting from your friendships, from friend to friend, because not everybody can hold that same space and that same weight as somebody else, right? So then the S is selfishness, right? And I think that's just reflecting back to what we were ending with the E with. What's your capacity? What do you honestly have room for to commit to to do work in. Okay, I'm actually going to ask this question, and I want you guys to ponder it. You don't necessarily have to respond here because I know we're running out of time. But I want you to really think for a second. When you hear the term, I want friendships and relationships to be natural and organic. What are you really hearing in that, and how are you able to formulate that? And the reason I asked this is because I'm learning. Actually, from listening to this podcast, she made a really good point. I'm going to be honest. It wasn't something I thought about prior to, but this podcast, she made a really good point that what she hears oftentimes, again, specifically talking about women in this aspect, what she hears oftentimes is that people are unwilling to do the work and committing work that all relationships of any level require for it to actually have weight and to actually be meaningful. And a lot of people would just rather be chill and lackadaisical in their relationships. So the whole idea of allowing things to be natural means I don't really have to put any effort to actually create something here. Instead, I just want it to come. And in reality, people that are more healthier and have more healthier relationships are actually receiving of the truth, according to what she shares from statistics and studies. They're receiving of the fact that relationships require work, and that it's going to require them to participate in what they're trying to build in order for it to actually be what they want it to be. So I appreciate you, Nick. It means they don't want to have to change or adapt, but they want someone who's super income. I think that's on point. Yeah. So I just think it's something to consider, because again, when you think of the selfishness, you're just really reflecting what is your capacity. Last analogy I'll give, I'll shut up. I know we got to go. I learned from myself, and I did this. And so this analogy definitely hits home for me, and I hope maybe it resonates with any of you. I really desire for men in any relationships, in all relationships, to stop leaving the house, going on a long road trip, knowing you're low on gas, right? When you go on a road trip and you're choosing to drive the distance for the road trip, and you leave, we all know that you need your clothes, you need your vacation plans, you need all these other kinds of items and requirements in order to make the trip, right? In order to have the funds for the trip, in order to enjoy yourself once you get there. But we all also know that if you're going by car, you need gas. And the worst thing you can do is leave the driveway and skip all gas stations you need to fill up in order to make the drive to where you're going. And of course, make the trip back, filling back up before you leave the destination heading back home. Because if you don't, what will happen is you will find yourself on the road, losing gas, running on E, and not only are you stranded and never make it to your destination, but you harm others who decided to come with you and strand them as well. Here's the point I'm making in this. Let the gas tank represent capacity. A lot of us in the space of relationships choose to think that I have the willingness and desire to go after relationships that I honestly know I don't have the capacity for in this season. This is why you hear people say all the time how much they're blindsided by somebody who they connected with and things were gelling well. And then when things begin getting serious and commitment is beginning to become a form of conversation that's regular, you start seeing them back out and say, I just don't have the capacity right now. But you knew that. That's not something new. You knew that prior to even engaging with that person. So what you did is you went against what you knew, and you decided to continue that, knowing where it was going to end up, with you not committing, with you not willing to actually put in the work to honor the relationship. And more importantly, you've foregone the conclusion of honoring and loving that individual because you just simply wasted their time in front of their face by telling them everything they wanted to hear, knowing you did not have the capacity to fulfill it. All I'm asking you to do is before you check yourself into a commitment, into a relationship, you gotta look at that and say, what do I have the capacity for? What can I genuinely and honestly say I can consistently show up for and show up as? And if I cannot consistently move in the efforts that I am portraying to you, I can when we first start communicating, when we first start dating romantically, or perhaps in this community that I'm choosing to commit myself to, then perhaps we need to really do some self-reflection. And we really need to gauge where our capacity measurement is at, and not just be aware of it and then just tell people to put up with it when we connect with them, but to actually fill up, to fill up. Okay, let me enlarge my capacity. How do I do that? Well, I got to build a relationship with God. I got to be able to be consistent in that. I got to be able to get in, again, small groups or communities where I'm held accountable for the things and visions and desires that I desire to have, that I desire to reach. Okay. If I'm in a season where I just don't have the time for those kinds of things, okay, I just need to be honest. Let's just start there. I just need to be honest with where I am instead of telling people I'm where I'm not and then convincing them that they need to tag along with me so they can be stranded too. That's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. So do a lot of good self-reflection and really understand where your capacity is. I think when you do that, again, FILES is the acronym she uses. When you file your relationships, I think you're able to actually gauge them a lot better, have healthier ones, know what you can bring to them, know who you are in them and not losing yourself in them, and really carry more authentic connections in the end that I think are beneficial for you. And whether they are for a season, for a reason, or for a lifetime, it is something that you can I won't say easily, it's something that you can genuinely and gradually grow from and bear fruit from, that will expose so much in you that you may not have known was in you until you encounter that person, that situation, that circumstance that made you better when handling it properly and not bitter. All right, case closed. I hope that made sense. We appreciate you guys so much for tuning in to this conversation. Listen, we're coming back next week with Love, the Lost Art of Love, final part next week. So you guys tune in for that. We're going to go through the last dimension there. And man, we'll be back. You know, there's so much stuff that we talk about in relationships every week. You know, it's just a daily part of our life and experience. So hopefully you guys got a lot from that. Check out, obviously the Maverick.tv. I know you guys got a stream going down tomorrow, right? B?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so you guys, y'all guys.
6 p.m. EST.
Oh, EST. Oh,
yeah,
that's early. That's early.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Better put it in with the bedtime. Got you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't apply to me. But anyway, you guys check that out. Be sure to grab your Ninja membership to get there. And man, we appreciate you guys so much. YouTube, Twitch, Maverick.tv. And until our next conversation, be easy and be breezy. God first. God bless.